Every year, like clockwork, I joined the group of neighbors who went caroling through our street. It was a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other's names and the houses were neatly lined, decorated with wreaths and strings of lights. Each year, I looked forward to it. The air was always sharp with the cold of early December, my breath fogging as I walked, but there was a comfort in the routine, in the sound of everyone singing familiar songs, in the laughter echoing between the houses. I knew every house on the street. I knew which ones handed out candy, which ones gave hot cocoa, which ones had barking dogs that made the kids jump. It was safe, familiar, and that was exactly why that night became unforgettable in the worst way. We had started our usual route, moving house to house, singing carefully rehearsed carols. My voice wasn't great, but I liked the warmth of the lanterns and the soft glow of the Christmas lights reflecting on the snow-dusted lawns. By the time we reached the house at the very end of the street, it was late. The other kids had drifted off to the last few houses, leaving me to finish the route alone. That house had always been slightly different. The yard was well kept, but there was a strange stillness about it. The decorations were minimal, a few icicle lights hanging from the eaves, a wreath that looked slightly faded. Nothing alarming, just quiet in a way that felt odd compared to the cheer of the other homes. That night, the lights were on, warm, yellow light spilling onto the snow outside. I assumed someone was inside, ready to greet me, maybe offer a smile, a plate of cookies, something like every other house. I knocked on the door. It was sturdy, the kind that made a solid thunk when you knocked. I waited. There was no sound of footsteps approaching, no jingling of the door handle. Nothing, just the muffled hum of the heater inside, the soft creak of a settling house. I knocked again, a little louder, the echo bouncing across the empty yard. The door slowly opened. Inside, the house was bright and warm, the smell of pine heavy in the air. But there was no one there. The living room was empty, silent except for the faint ticking of a clock I couldn't see from where I stood. My eyes scanned the room. There was a figure in the corner, standing unnaturally still. Pale, motionless. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, a holiday decoration meant to be clever or whimsical. But there was nothing festive about it. I called out, my voice shaking. My words echoed too sharply, the way they always do in an empty space. No answer. Not a word. My stomach tightened. Something didn't feel right. I stepped forward, my boots crunching on the hardwood floor, and that's when I noticed the smell. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Rot. The kind of decay you don't forget. My breath caught. I looked down and froze. There were footprints on the floor. Dark, sticky, dried, definitely not water. Blood. The prints led toward the staircase. They were uneven, messy, like someone had dragged their feet. I wanted to turn and leave. My heart was hammering, my skin crawling. But before I could move, the figure shifted. Slowly. Mechanically. It wasn't moving the way a living person does. Its joints were stiff, its head turning in jerky movements, almost like a puppet being wound. I stumbled back instinctively. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy. The smell was stronger now, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. I wanted to scream, but the sound seemed to vanish into the walls around me. Every instinct I had told me I had to get out, had to leave this house and never look back. And then the figure moved its head completely toward me, as though it had been waiting, and the world fell into a terrifying stillness, the kind that makes time feel like it stops. I bolted. My feet pounded the wooden floors, my breath coming in loud, ragged gasps. I didn't look back. The warmth of the house and the glow of the lights couldn't compete with the fear gripping me. I didn't know what I had seen. I didn't want to know. Outside, the cold air hit me like a shock, my lungs burning as I ran across the snow, hearing nothing but the echo of my own footsteps. The street was empty. The other houses, full of holiday cheer, seemed impossibly far away. I didn't stop running until I reached the corner, until I saw my parents' house, the glow of our windows warm and familiar. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about that house. The figure, the smell, the footprints. I tried to tell myself I had imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me because I had been alone, tired, late at night. But something in my gut told me it was real. The fear didn't fade. A few days later, I found out what had happened. The house at the end of the street had been empty for weeks. The owners had left for the holidays early, but the caretaker had failed to check the place properly. The figure I had seen was a man who had broken in, hiding out in the house. He had been injured, bleeding heavily from a deep wound. The smell of rot had been from a combination of his blood and the early stages of decay from food and trash left inside. The footprints were his. He had been moving up and down the stairs, trying to find a way to get out without being seen, trapped in the empty house, desperate and dangerous. The neighborhood police had found him when the caretaker finally did a proper walkthrough. He was alive but severely dehydrated and delusional. They said he had a history of breaking into homes, of hiding out in places where people would not notice him. He wasn't a ghost or a spirit, not some horror story come to life. He was a human being, unpredictable, and capable of terrifying things when left unchecked. After that night, I never went caroling alone again. I avoided that house entirely, even during the day. The memory of the figure, the way it moved, the smell, and the footprints haunted me for months. I learned to pay attention to the details that I had ignored before. A house too quiet, lights on without signs of life, small things that signal danger in an otherwise normal world. I never told anyone else in my neighborhood exactly what I had seen, not in detail. I didn't want to scare them, but also, the memory of it was mine, and carrying it felt like a scar I couldn't erase. The street went back to normal eventually, people decorating, children running from house to house, the familiar hum of holiday cheer filling the air. But every time I passed that last house, even years later, I felt a chill. I remembered the warmth of the lights inside, the stillness of the figure, the smell, and the footprints leading to the stairs. I remembered what it felt like to be completely alone in a place that should have felt safe and familiar, and I knew that sometimes danger doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly in a well-kept house at the end of a cheerful street, until someone unsuspecting steps just close enough. I still go caroling now, but never alone. And I never, ever go to the house at the end of the street. The fear I felt that night stays with me, a reminder that horror doesn't need ghosts or monsters. It can be entirely real, human, and terrifying in ways that no storybook could ever match. The first snow of the season fell late on the night before Christmas Eve. I had been awake for a while, restless, listening to the quiet tapping of flakes against the roof. The kind of snow that comes down softly, covering everything in a smooth, untouched layer. By the time morning came, my entire yard was buried in white, glistening under the pale light that filtered through the overcast sky. Everything looked calm, perfect, like a scene from a Christmas card. Except for one thing. Right in the center of the backyard stood a snowman. I froze for a moment, unsure if I was seeing things, half expecting it to dissolve when I blinked. I live alone. I had gone to bed the night before with an empty yard, a yard that had been mine and mine alone for months. There had been no footprints, no signs of anyone outside. And now, here was this snowman, at least 6 feet tall, with a rounded, lumpy shape, standing with its twisted stick arms jutting out unnaturally. Its face was the worst part. Dark, buttonless holes served as eyes, like hollow pits that stared directly at me from across the yard. The mouth was a jagged line, carved deeply into the snow, almost too deliberate, as if someone had taken their time shaping it to look menacing. I went to the back door and hesitated before opening it. The cold air hit me in waves, sharp and bitter, but I forced myself forward. When I stepped outside, the snow crunched beneath my boots, and my eyes followed a trail of footprints. They were small, narrow, and careful, weaving around the house. I recognized the patterns immediately. Someone had walked all the way around, touching every corner of the property, circling back and then disappearing into the woods behind me. The trees loomed darkly, heavy with snow, hiding whatever had left them there. I spent the day walking the perimeter of my yard, staring at the snowman from different angles, checking for signs that it might have fallen naturally or been blown into place. Nothing made sense. The snow was packed in tight, the base firm, as though someone had spent hours sculpting it. The stick arms were crooked in ways no wind could bend them, pointing outward with an odd aggression. Every time I glanced toward the woods, I half expected to see movement, a shadow among the trees, but there was nothing. Only silence. The night that followed was worse. I slept in short bursts, waking to every creak of the old house, every pop of the wood as it settled. Around midnight, the windows began to rattle. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sounds were too methodical, too close. Scraping, dragging noises ran along the outside walls, circling the house in a slow, steady pattern. My stomach tightened every time a shadow flicked across the frosted glass. I left the porch light on, pacing the living room, checking every lock, making sure the doors were bolted. I even moved the snow shovel closer to the door, feeling it might serve as some sort of barrier or tool if someone were actually out there. The scraping continued for hours, moving from one side of the house to another. Sometimes it stopped, and I thought maybe it had gone, only to start again from a different direction. I dared not open a window, dared not peek outside, but I could see the dim shapes of the trees through the curtains, leaning in slightly as though they were watching. Sleep finally overcame me just before dawn, though I had hardly closed my eyes without expecting a hand on the glass or a shadow stepping out from the treeline. Morning came, pale and gray. I approached the back door with caution, every step slow, deliberate. When I opened it, my heart sank. The snowman was gone from the yard. At first, I thought maybe the wind had toppled it, or it had collapsed under its own weight. But then I looked down the porch steps, and there it was again, moved, impossibly, to the front porch. Its hollow eyes faced the door directly, as though it had been waiting for me to wake up. The jagged mouth seemed wider, more deliberate, as if it had been reshaped to stare more directly at me. I checked every window and door, feeling the panic rise. There was no sign of anyone inside the house, nothing moved. I went outside carefully, inspecting the snow around the porch. Footprints led from the yard up the steps and circled back toward the driveway, disappearing into the tire tracks from my car. Whoever had built it, whoever had moved it, had done so quietly with precision. It wasn't random. It wasn't a prank. I decided I had to act. I grabbed a large stick and approached the snowman, ready to dismantle it. Each step I took, the snow underfoot compressed heavily, leaving deep impressions. When I reached it, I swung the stick against the torso. The snow held firm, compact, and wet, resisting the strike. I struck again and again until the top half finally fell, rolling into a messy heap at my feet. Even then, the base remained upright, as if it had been anchored, as if someone had spent the time to pack it tightly against the porch floor. Shaking, I decided to sweep the rest of the snow away, brushing the steps and porch clean. Every so often I paused, listening, expecting footsteps or laughter, or the sound of someone retreating into the woods. Nothing. The house was silent except for the wind moving through the bare branches. I finally went back inside, locked the doors, and waited. I stayed awake the entire day, watching every shadow, checking the windows constantly. The snowman never returned, not that night or the next, but the fear it brought lingered, gnawing at me. In the days that followed, I took extra precautions. I installed motion sensor lights, checked the locks multiple times before bed, and set up cameras around the house. The footage confirmed my fears. Someone had been there, moving around in the yard late at night, circling the house, stepping carefully over the snow, precise in every movement. Whoever it was, they were cautious, deliberate, and familiar with my property. It wasn't a random stranger passing by. Over the next few weeks, I learned to live with the fear. I never saw anyone again, never caught a glimpse of movement in the woods. But the feeling remained, the memory of those dark, hollow eyes staring from the snow, the knowledge that someone had spent hours outside in the cold, placing that figure where I would see it. It was a reminder that even in the quietest, most isolated places, people could be there without leaving a trace, watching, waiting. By the time the next snowfall came, I had taken every precaution I could think of. The motion lights, the cameras, the reinforced locks, even leaving a radio playing all night to mask any sound outside. The yard stayed empty that winter, calm and white again, but the memory of that first snowman never left me. I would never forget the hollow eyes, the twisted stick arms, and the way it had stared at me from the porch, as if it had been waiting for me to wake up. I knew then, without doubt, that some people could be patient, careful, and cruel, and that fear could be planted as deliberately as any object, even in the middle of a snowy Christmas. I spent every Christmas afterward checking the yard first thing in the morning, walking around the house, making sure there were no signs, no footprints, no new snowmen waiting. I learned to sleep lightly, always alert, because that winter had shown me something I could never unsee. That isolation didn't make me safe. It only made it easier for someone to get close without me knowing. The snowman never came back, but its presence stayed, a reminder of a reality far colder than the snow itself. It was the week before Christmas, and I had finally finished putting up the few decorations I owned. Nothing fancy, just a string of cheap red and green outdoor lights lining the edge of the roof and the railing of the porch. They blinked on and off, mostly erratic, but I liked the look of them from inside. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I lived alone, and my neighborhood was quiet, mostly older houses with families who had gone all out with elaborate displays. Mine was simple, messy even, but it was mine and I liked it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was warm, the heater humming softly, and I was sitting in the living room on the couch, scrolling through my phone. The only light in the room came from the screen and the faint glow of the Christmas lights outside. I didn't think much about it at first, just the usual holiday mood lingering, a little anticipation for the day itself. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange. The lights didn't just blink in their usual pattern. One section seemed to shift slightly, almost like it was moving on its own. I squinted, blinking, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I shook my head and laughed at myself, thinking I was just imagining things. The blinking was cheap, the string uneven, maybe some of the bulbs were loose. I went back to scrolling, trying to ignore it. But then I caught the pattern again, more noticeable this time, like a small wave moving along the string. My heart started to beat a little faster, though I still tried to convince myself it was nothing. I reached for my laptop and, on a whim, opened the feed from my front yard camera. I hadn't looked at it in days, maybe a week, mostly because it was just a basic model that recorded only when it sensed motion. I expected to see a dark, empty yard. What I saw instead made my stomach drop. The lights weren't just blinking. They were arranged in a way I couldn't explain, forming faint circles in the darkness. At first, I thought it was a trick of the camera, a reflection or a glitch. Then the circles seemed to rotate slowly, almost deliberately. I froze as the camera feed adjusted. There, standing on my porch, was my own figure, my shape clearly outlined in the faint light of the blinking bulbs. It wasn't a recording from earlier. I was there in real time. I didn't move, barely breathed, staring at the screen as the lights circled around me, following the shape of my body. I could see the edges of the porch railing, the outline of my coat hanging on the hook by the door, all framed by the spinning lights. The effect was so precise, so intentional, that it made my skin crawl. I closed the laptop quickly, my hands shaking, and stepped back. I considered unplugging the lights immediately but paused. Something didn't feel right about going outside to do it. My living room window looked out onto the porch, and the way the lights were circling on the camera, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked out, it would feel different somehow. Like they would be moving in a way I could see even without the camera. I stayed on the couch for what felt like hours, only daring to glance at the lights indirectly through the window. Every time I moved my eyes toward them, I thought I saw the movement again, tiny shifts that were impossible to explain. My mind started running through every possibility, every rational explanation. Loose bulbs, faulty wiring, a trick of shadows from the streetlights, maybe even a malfunctioning camera reflecting light strangely. But none of it made sense fully. Eventually, I forced myself to turn off the laptop and step closer to the window. I pulled the blinds aside slowly, trying to look at the yard and porch without drawing attention to myself. The lights blinked in their normal sequence now, seemingly random, cheap, harmless. My stomach eased slightly. Maybe it was just my imagination after all. The hours of scrolling through social media, the late-night fatigue, and the stress of wrapping presents early had finally caught up to me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like the lights had done something I wasn't supposed to see. I went to bed but left my door unlocked and a small lamp on in the living room. I kept imagining the circles of light rotating slowly, tracing my figure over and over, and it felt like someone, or something, had studied me without ever appearing. I tried to sleep, but I didn't. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the image of the lights moving, spinning, circling around me on the porch. The next day, I left the house as early as I could. I went out for groceries, walked around the neighborhood, anything to keep my distance. I didn't touch the lights, didn't look at the porch. Driving down the street, I noticed my neighbors had their houses lit up as usual, cheerful and bright. But for me, my own house had become a place I couldn't face. Every turn in my mind made the memory of those lights more deliberate in a way I couldn't explain. I returned only briefly to grab necessities, keeping my back to the house whenever possible. I didn't plug in the lights, didn't even peek at the porch. The longer I stayed away, the more my anxiety settled into a dull hum, but it was still there. I couldn't forget the image of the circles, the way they rotated around me, precise and steady. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. Eventually, after several days, I called a friend in the area to check the house. I didn't want anyone to enter, just look from the yard. When they texted me back confirming that the lights were just blinking normally and nothing was unusual, I felt relief for the first time in days. I still didn't go inside right away. I stayed at a motel for a night, then returned cautiously. Once back, I unplugged all the lights. Every strand, every bulb disconnected. I left the boxes in the garage, untouched, and didn't decorate the house again that year. The porch looked bare, cold, but it felt safer. I made a rule for myself to stay out of the house late at night, and for the rest of the season, I left the windows covered and the front door locked. When New Year's came, I gradually returned to normal routines, slowly letting myself feel comfortable in my own home again. The lights stayed in the garage for years. I never used them again. I couldn't explain what I saw that night, and I stopped questioning it too much. I didn't want to. The image stayed with me, but over time it became just a memory, like a warning I didn't need to test again. I learned to enjoy the holidays quietly, without decorations on the porch, without lights drawing attention. The house was mine, and it was safe again, as long as I left the lights unplugged, out of reach, and never looked at the porch the way I had that night. I still remember the shapes, the movement, the way my own figure had been framed by something I could never fully explain. But I also learned that some things are better left alone, left in the dark, and that sometimes safety is simply walking away. I woke on Christmas morning to a quiet house, the kind of silence that sits heavy in your chest when you're alone. I'd slept in later than usual, the warmth of my blankets keeping me from thinking about the day ahead. The sunlight was pale, slanting through the blinds, casting faint stripes across the living room floor. As I stretched and rubbed the sleep from my eyes, my gaze fell on the Christmas tree in the corner of the room. I'd decorated it a few days earlier, cheap white lights and a few ornaments I'd collected over the years. At first, it looked normal, as it always did, but then I noticed something strange, a small package tucked under the lowest branches. It wasn't large, just a box wrapped in plain brown paper, no bow, no ribbon. The first thought that crossed my mind was that I had forgotten I bought it. Maybe I had been so tired and distracted in the week before Christmas that I'd set it aside and forgotten. But as I picked it up, it didn't feel like any package I'd touched before. The paper was rough and dry, and there was a faint, musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. There was no label, no name, no writing at all. Curiosity pushed me to open it. Inside was a pair of gloves, old and frayed, the kind that had clearly been used for years. They were stiff, but softened in some places, the fabric worn down, and the edges dirt-stained. I ran my fingers over them, trying to understand why someone would leave gloves under my tree. That's when I noticed a scrap of paper tucked into one of the gloves. The handwriting was messy, hurried, and slightly smudged, as though the person who wrote it had been trembling. The words made my stomach tighten. I've been waiting to hold them again. I froze. My heart started beating faster, a cold sweat forming across my forehead. I live alone. Every door and window had been locked the night before. I know I locked them. I know I double-checked before going to bed. My mind raced, searching for some explanation. A delivery? A prank? It didn't make sense. Whoever left this package had either broken into my home while I slept or had been here without me knowing, but there was no sign of forced entry. I set the gloves down on the table and began checking the house methodically. Closet by closet, room by room. The kitchen, the bathroom, my bedroom, the living room again, even under the furniture. Nothing. No one. The house felt empty, and yet the presence of that message made it feel like I was being watched. I kept glancing at the tree, half expecting to see someone crouched in the shadows, but it remained still. I spent the morning in a kind of anxious daze, unable to focus on anything else. The usual holiday cheer, the smell of coffee, the sound of the old Christmas playlist I'd left on shuffle, felt wrong, like they were coming from a different world. Every small noise made me jump, the refrigerator humming, the wind brushing against the windows, the faint creak of the floorboards in the hallway. By afternoon, I tried to shake it off, telling myself it must have been some kind of elaborate prank, someone who knew I lived alone. I tried to eat, tried to tidy up, but the gloves sat on the table like a warning. I couldn't bring myself to touch them again, not after reading that note. Even when I glanced at them, I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't until evening that I noticed something else. As the light faded and shadows deepened, I saw muddy footprints across the living room carpet. At first, I thought I was imagining them, but the pattern was too clear, the mud too real. They led from the large bay window in the corner of the room to the tree. I felt my throat tighten, my hands going cold. Someone had been in my house. My window, the one I never leave open, was slightly ajar, a thin gap I didn't remember seeing before. The thought that someone could have entered and left the package without me noticing made my head spin. I crouched to inspect the prints, the dirt dark and wet in the fading light. They were small, careful, deliberate. Whoever had done this had known how to move quietly. They had come in, left the package, and walked back out without making a sound, like a shadow slipping through a room. I felt a deep unease settle over me, a sense that my personal space, the one place I felt safe, had been violated in the most intimate way possible. For the rest of the evening, I didn't move the gloves. I didn't touch them. I didn't even look at them again. The thought of someone reaching into my life, into my home, and leaving that message made the idea of opening any other presents feel impossible. I stacked the few gifts I had bought for myself back in the corner and left them untouched. I sat in the living room, lights dim, watching the shadows shift across the walls. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the window made me flinch. My mind kept returning to the note, to the gloves, to the knowledge that someone had been here and had touched the very things I own. I thought about the possibility of calling the police, but what would I say? Someone broke in, left a package, and left? There was no way to prove it. I had no evidence beyond the footprints, and even they were fading in the cold evening air. Night fell, and I locked myself in my bedroom, leaving a small lamp on. I couldn't sleep, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined hands reaching out, the scritch of dirt under nails, the feeling of someone's presence inches from me. I stayed awake until the early hours, watching the house, waiting for some movement that never came. By morning, I knew I had made a choice. I would never touch the gloves. I would never try to understand who had left them, or why. They remained under the tree, a silent, immovable reminder of the intrusion. I began packing up my other presents, leaving them unopened, the joy of Christmas swallowed by the tension of what had happened. When friends called or texted, I made excuses, telling them I'd been busy, that I'd wanted a quiet holiday. I didn't tell anyone the truth, not even the closest family. I couldn't. Over the next few days, I inspected my house repeatedly, checking locks, windows, and doors. Nothing was out of place. Nothing else was missing. It was as though the intruder had disappeared completely, leaving only those gloves and that note behind. I eventually put the house back in order, removed the lights from the tree, and tried to return to normal life, but I never unpacked any of the presents that remained. The memory of that Christmas morning, the silence broken by footprints and a message meant only for me, stayed with me. The gloves sat untouched, a permanent reminder that someone had been inside my home when I wasn't looking, someone who had reached out in a way I could never forget. I still think about that day, every Christmas since. I've never felt truly safe in my house again. I check locks obsessively, double-check windows, and leave lights on at night. I never allow anyone near my home unannounced, and I never, under any circumstances, touch anything left unexpectedly. The gloves are long gone now, thrown away in a bag marked for the dumpster. I didn't keep them, couldn't keep them. But the fear they left, the knowledge that someone had been there, remains as real as the cold, quiet mornings of that Christmas, and it's something I'll never forget. I was wrapping gifts late on Christmas Eve, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with rolls of wrapping paper and a mountain of ribbons scattered around me. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder than it should. Outside, the wind rustled the bare branches of the trees, making long shadows dance across the snow-covered yard. I worked carefully, folding edges and taping corners, listening to the rhythmic snip of scissors and the soft crackle of tape. The smell of pine from the small Christmas tree in the corner, mixed with the faint smell of baked sugar from cookies I had made earlier in the day. Everything was normal, too normal, peaceful in that way that makes you relax a little too much. Then I heard it, a soft, faint sound that didn't belong, a voice singing, low and quiet, barely above a whisper. It was a familiar carol, one I could recognize even with the faintness, but it was off. There was a kind of strain in it, as if the person singing were holding their breath, or trying to be careful not to be heard. I froze, listening, trying to convince myself it was a neighbor, a group of kids walking home from a caroling route, maybe a radio somewhere in the distance. I put down my scissors and slowly walked to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. The yard was empty. The snow sparkled under the street lamp, untouched, and the street itself was silent except for the faint creaking of a nearby fence in the wind. No one was there. I stepped back from the window, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. The singing grew louder, closer, muffled, as if it was coming from above me. My heart picked up speed. The sound was no longer distant, no longer something I could explain away. It had a presence, a weight to it, and it was definitely inside the house. Slowly, piece by piece, I realized the sound was coming from the attic. I could hear the faint echo of it through the ceiling, soft but deliberate. Every hair on my neck stood on end. I live alone. There's no one here. No one should be in the attic. I hesitated, my hand lingering on the latch of the pull-down ladder. The attic was something I almost never used. It was full of boxes I hadn't touched in years, old furniture covered in sheets, holiday decorations I had long forgotten. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed, and the closer I got to the attic floor, the more the singing faded, like it knew I was approaching. When I reached the top, the attic was empty, exactly how I remembered it. Dusty boxes stacked against walls, a mattress propped up in a corner, a trunk with old photo albums, a thin layer of dust covering everything. I exhaled, trying to calm myself. I was imagining it. It had to be the wind, the pipes, something ordinary. I stepped further into the attic, shuffling past boxes and furniture, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Fresh footprints in the dust. Clear, defined prints that hadn't been there before, leading toward a corner where no one could have walked without squeezing through the narrow space between the boxes. The prints were small, like someone wearing shoes that didn't belong to me, and they were recent. The dust hadn't had time to settle over them. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and felt a sudden, sharp spike of panic. The singing had stopped completely. The silence that replaced it was worse, heavier, oppressive. My ears picked up every small sound. The groan of the floorboards beneath me, the thump of my own heartbeat, the rustle of the roof insulation as the wind pressed against the house. I took a step back, my eyes glued to the footprints, and then it happened. A sensation, barely perceptible at first, like a quick, hot brush against the back of my neck. I froze completely. My entire body stiffened. I could feel the air shift, subtle but undeniable, as if someone had been right behind me, and then moved away just as quickly. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and for a long moment I didn't breathe. My mind raced, thinking through every rational possibility. Maybe a raccoon had somehow gotten in through a loose vent. Maybe a neighborhood kid had snuck in through the window. But the ladder was up, the attic hatch heavy and closed before I climbed. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without me noticing. I forced myself to move, slowly, deliberately, back to the ladder. Every step felt like it made some invisible person tense and watch me. I glanced around one last time at the corner where the prints led, trying to convince myself that maybe I had been imagining things, that the footprints were old and I hadn't noticed them. But the dust was undisturbed except for those prints. I climbed down, my hands trembling, and slammed the ladder back into its closed position. I went to the main door and locked it, double-checked every window, every bolt. The house felt different now, smaller, heavier, somehow more closed in. I tried to continue wrapping gifts, but I couldn't concentrate. Every noise made me jump. The soft hum of the heater sounded like footsteps. The wind rattling the windows sounded like someone tapping against the glass. I eventually gave up, leaving the gifts partially wrapped on the living room floor, and went to sit on the couch, blanket around me. I stared at the tree, the lights blinking rhythmically, trying to convince myself that everything was normal. Hours passed, the night deep and still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been in the attic with me. I didn't sleep much. Every creak, every shift in the house made me sit up, every shadow seemed to move. The next day, Christmas morning, I forced myself to go into the attic again, this time with a flashlight and a careful, deliberate pace. The floorboards were solid. Nothing had been moved. The boxes, the old furniture, the decorations, they were exactly as I remembered, except for the footprints. I checked every corner, every crevice, every inch of the floor. There was no sign of anyone. No sign of forced entry. No explanation. It was impossible to ignore what I had felt, but there was no rational evidence to support it. After that, I decided the attic would remain locked. I put a sturdy latch on it and added a small padlock. I haven't gone up there since. I don't need to. I don't want to. Every time I pass by the closed hatch, I feel the memory of that breath, that presence pressing against me. I've added extra locks to the doors and windows, even checked the hinges and latches multiple times. Every Christmas since, when I hear faint music outside or the soft creak of the house, I feel that same prickling tension in the back of my neck. I know logically the house is empty. I know there's no one in the attic, but I still feel it. That presence. The gifts under the tree now sit wrapped and ready. The lights blink on schedule. The house smells of pine and cinnamon. Everything appears normal, perfectly normal. But I avoid the attic. I keep the ladder closed, the padlock secure. I've considered selling the house, moving, anything to escape the memory of that night, but I haven't. Because leaving doesn't change what happened. Whatever was up there, whatever left those footprints and that fleeting breath, it doesn't need me to leave to continue existing. I've installed cameras now, motion sensors in every corner, and still, I avoid the attic. The memory is enough. The sound of a voice singing, faint, muffled, coming from above, and the undeniable sensation of being watched, of being close to someone who should not be there. That was enough to change everything about the way I live in this house. I don't go up there. I don't even look at the ceiling directly above me when I'm walking below. The house feels safer this way, the locked attic giving me control, a sense of closure. It is a simple measure, but it works. And that is the story of that Christmas Eve. The attic remains locked, the ladder secured, and I've learned that some mysteries are best left alone. The house is quiet again, the snow outside undisturbed, the lights blinking steadily, and I can finally, cautiously, feel normal again. But every Christmas, when I hear a faint carol drift on the wind, I pause, remembering the sound, remembering the breath, and I make sure every lock is secure, every window latched, and the attic remains, as it has since that night, completely off limits. I always drove home late on the night before Christmas Eve. The office had been busy all day, the fluorescent lights harsh overhead, phones ringing constantly, and emails piling up faster than I could manage. By the time I locked the office door and stepped out into the cold night, the city streets were quiet, almost too quiet, with only the occasional car or distant shout breaking the stillness. I started my usual drive home, taking the small suburban streets that wound between rows of modest houses, each one decorated with colored lights, wreaths, and fake snow. It had become a routine, almost comforting, the way the streets were always empty at this hour, and the occasional glowing window made the darkness feel less oppressive. This year, the neighborhood felt quieter than usual. I noticed the streetlights flickering slightly as I drove, and the wind had picked up, making the branches of the bare winter trees scrape against each other in a hollow, rattling sound. The houses on my street were mostly dark, the faint glow of a few Christmas lights the only sign of life. I felt a sense of calm at first, like the world had paused just for a moment. I drove slowly, listening to the tires crunch over the thin layer of frost that had formed on the asphalt. The quiet was the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound, every small movement, and I noticed it immediately. At the very end of my street, in the middle of the road, there was a Christmas tree. It wasn't small. It was enormous, taller than any tree I had ever seen planted in a yard, and it looked out of place, almost deliberately so, standing upright as if it had been set there carefully, not fallen from anyone's yard. No lights were on it, no music, nothing to indicate anyone was celebrating. My first instinct was to slow down and consider turning around, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Hanging from the tree were decorations, or what I initially thought were decorations, small pieces of something pale and ragged, fluttering slightly in the weak wind. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the shadows, and realized with a sinking feeling that these were not ornaments. They looked like pieces of skin. The smell hit me before I fully understood it, a sour, metallic tang that made my mouth go dry. I pulled the car over to the side of the street and sat frozen for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought I might break it. My pulse was loud in my ears, thumping with a kind of desperation that made it hard to think. Against every instinct screaming at me to drive away, I got out of the car. The air was colder than I remembered, biting at my cheeks and nose as I approached the tree, each step making a crunching sound on the frost that sounded impossibly loud in the still night. Closer now, I could see that the tree had been carefully arranged. The skin-like pieces were tied with thin strings, draped over the branches like grotesque ornaments. It was impossible to ignore. Near the base of the tree, pinned to the rough trunk with a small nail, was a note. My hands shook as I reached for it. The paper was slightly damp from the frost, and the ink was smeared in places, but I could make out the words clearly. "We see you every year. Don't forget us." I swallowed hard, a bitter taste of fear filling my mouth, and my knees felt weak. I looked around, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness beyond the streetlights. The road behind me was empty, and the houses on either side were silent, their windows dark. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who would do something like this? Who would leave a message like that, and why here on my street in the middle of the night? Then I noticed the footprints. They circled the base of the tree, dragging slightly in the frost, and then disappeared into the shadows between the houses. The prints were human, small but unmistakable, and they went from one house to another, cutting across lawns, stepping over fences. Whoever had left them had moved carefully, deliberately, and then vanished into the night. I wanted to run, to get back into my car and speed away, but something kept me rooted in place. I felt the quiet pressing in around me, the wind making the branches above the tree shake and whisper. The street seemed narrower, darker, as if the houses themselves were leaning in to watch me. I took a step back and noticed details I hadn't before. Small scratches on the paint of my car, faint stains on the asphalt, the way the frost had been disturbed in places that didn't make sense unless someone had been moving around in the darkness. My heart hammered, and I realized that the note hadn't been meant just for me to see. It was meant to make me feel watched, to make me understand that someone had been paying attention. I turned back toward my car slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, like I was walking through water. I glanced at the tree one last time, and it seemed larger than before, more oppressive, the shadows between its branches deeper. The wind shifted, carrying a faint rustling from the direction of the houses, and I imagined the footprints moving again, slipping silently over the frosty lawns, into the darkness beyond my vision. I knew I had to leave, knew that staying even a few seconds longer would be dangerous, but the fear clung to me, thick and unrelenting. I got into my car and locked the doors, fumbling to start the engine with trembling hands. The headlights cut through the night, illuminating the road ahead, but the tree was still there in the rearview mirror, pale and looming, like a warning frozen in time. I drove slowly, refusing to take my usual route, turning instead onto a longer, twisting street that would take me home, but keep me as far from that corner as possible. My pulse didn't slow until I was several blocks away, the houses returning to their normal, comforting emptiness. The next morning, I heard from neighbors that the tree had vanished. No one had seen anyone place it. No one had seen anything at all. Police came, but they found no evidence, no footprints, no traces of the note or the strange ornaments. It was as if the tree had never existed. But I remembered everything. The smell, the shapes, the note, the footprints leading into the houses. I couldn't shake it, and I never drove that street again. Years passed, and every Christmas Eve, I took a different route home. I kept my eyes open for anything unusual, anything that didn't belong. And every year, the memory of that tree, standing silently in the road with its grotesque decorations and that note, haunted me. It was a reminder that some people watch, that some people remember, and that some streets are better left alone. The fear never went away entirely, but I learned to live with it, and I always kept a mental map of every route I could take to avoid that corner, avoiding it as if it held a kind of invisible trap that only revealed itself in the dead of night. The tree was gone, but the warning remained, etched into my memory, clear and unyielding. It was just past midnight on Christmas Day when I first noticed the soft knocking at my door. The sound was almost hesitant, quiet enough that I thought for a moment I might have imagined it. I had been sitting in the living room, the faint glow of the Christmas tree lights casting red and green shadows across the walls, a half-empty mug of tea cooling on the table beside me. Everything was quiet, the house wrapped in the stillness that only Christmas night can bring when everyone else is asleep. At first, I ignored the knock, assuming it might have been the wind or a branch brushing against the siding. But then it came again, more deliberate this time, just a soft tap that didn't quite match the sound of anything outside. I went to the door cautiously, peering through the peephole, but the porch was empty. There was no one standing there, no silhouette, nothing moving in the dim light of the street lamp. I hesitated, heart beating faster, but when I looked down, I saw a small package resting neatly on the porch step. The wrapping was simple, nondescript brown paper tied with a thin string. No bow, no festive ribbon, nothing to suggest it was meant for Christmas. I bent down to pick it up, glancing at the delivery label. My name and my address were written clearly, but the sender's information was blank. That alone made my stomach tighten. I didn't recognize the handwriting. I hadn't ordered anything, hadn't asked anyone to send me anything, and no one close to me had any reason to be delivering gifts in this way. I carried the package inside, my fingers tight around the string, the weight light, but my mind heavy with a sense of unease. I set it on the kitchen counter and examined it more closely. There were no markings beyond the label, no company logo, no return address, nothing to indicate where it had come from. My instinct was to put it down and leave it, but curiosity gnawed at me. I carefully untied the string and peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a small digital photo frame, about the size of a thick paperback book, black and sleek, its screen blank and unlit. I turned it on. The moment it flickered to life, I froze. On the screen, the first image appeared. It was me lying in my bed, asleep. I could see the sheets twisted around my shoulders, the way my hair fell across the pillow, the small curve of my hand resting on the blanket. The angle was unmistakable. It was from inside my bedroom, facing the bed from a corner I had only ever thought private. My heart began to pound in my chest. I dropped the frame onto the counter, but the screen flickered again, cycling through another image. Another one appeared, showing me walking through the living room earlier that day, completely unaware that someone had been watching. Then the kitchen, the hallway, every image a different angle, different room, all around my house, all taken when I had no idea. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the rug, and the frame clattered to the floor, but it continued cycling images, relentless and precise. Panic hit me like a wave. The house suddenly felt small, closed in. I ran to the front door and yanked it open, peering out into the cold night. The package was gone. My breath came fast, forming clouds in the freezing air. I looked around the porch, along the driveway, down the side of the house. Nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign that anyone had even been there. Every instinct in my body screamed that someone had been inside, had been watching me, and had left as quietly as they had arrived. I grabbed my coat and ran to the street, looking down both directions. The neighborhood was still. The houses were dark, the streetlights casting long, empty shadows. I ran back inside, locking the door behind me, fumbling to call the police. My hands shook so badly that I could barely hold the phone. When they arrived, it was still dark outside, the patrol car's headlights cutting through the night like knives. They searched the house, going from room to room with flashlights, checking every window, every door, every closet. But there was no evidence of forced entry, no fingerprints, no footprints, nothing that could explain how anyone had gotten inside or how the digital frame had captured those images. It was as if someone had appeared and disappeared without a trace. I explained the photos, showed them the broken frame on the floor. The police took notes, asked questions, but ultimately there was nothing they could do. The frame was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up in the living room, the Christmas tree lights still blinking, but they no longer felt warm or comforting. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind outside, made my stomach tighten. I checked every window, every door, every lock. I even moved the furniture around, trying to see if there had been a hidden passage, a way for someone to have come and gone without leaving a mark. I found nothing. My house was as it always had been, except that I no longer felt safe in it. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and hyper-awareness. I couldn't stop thinking about the images I had seen, the way someone had watched me so closely without me noticing. I installed new locks, extra security cameras, motion detectors, anything I could afford to make the house feel secure. I walked the rooms repeatedly, checking each corner, each blind, each closet. Even then, every small sound made me jump. Every shadow made my heart race. Friends and neighbors noticed my nerves, the way I flinched at the wind, the way I double-checked the doors. I didn't tell them the full story. I didn't want to sound paranoid, and even then, I didn't know what part of it was even real, or what someone was capable of. A week passed before I felt even a little relief. The images hadn't returned, no more packages appeared, no further knocks at the door. The police didn't find anything, no leads, no evidence, no explanation. Eventually, I learned to go back to some semblance of routine. I didn't fully relax, I couldn't. I always left lights on at night, and I installed extra security on every window. The house felt different now, smaller, less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Even now, months later, I check every door before bed, look out every window before leaving the house, my movements slower, careful, precise. That Christmas night had changed the way I saw safety, privacy, and even my own home. I never found out who sent the package or how they managed to get those images. The frame itself was gone, vanished in the night as silently as it had arrived. But the fear stayed with me, not as a shadow or a ghost, but as the knowledge that someone somewhere had been inside my life without my knowledge, had watched me in my most private moments and could do so again. I never fully stopped checking, never fully stopped locking every door, never fully stopped looking for signs that someone might be there. It became a part of me, a reminder that even the places you trust most can be vulnerable, and that some things cannot be unseen. The house was mine, but I no longer felt alone in it, and I never felt entirely safe again.